Okay, we're now going to start into section 2, which is about relating. And when I talk about relating, what I mean is, how do you manage your differences with your partner? How do you create clear agreements with your partner? How do you set expectations about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? And what happens when someone does something that's not acceptable? So we're going to go into all of this. We're also going to share with you some particular mindfulness practices that are extremely relevant at this stage in your relating experience. And this also is very helpful in terms of if you're asking the question, should we go on into the mating or the marriage stage? Going through this stage may help you answer that question. Okay, welcome to Rheology once again. You'll notice that this material is copyrighted, and we would love for you to share what you learn, but please don't make copies of this course and distribute them to other people. Anyone can buy this program, and if they can't afford it, we will go out of our way to help them so that they can afford to do so. So this is part 2 of our course, Dating, Relating, and Mating. And in this section, we're going to focus on relating. Now, if you have a partner, we encourage you to go through this course with that person. That's how you're going to get the most out of this. And if you don't have a partner, then going through this course will help you find one, because it will help you become a better partner yourself. Now, this is a reminder of our basic model, which is that there are 3 stages to romantic relationships. There's the dating, the relating, and the mating. And in part 1 of this course, I talked about how people have a tendency to get these stages confused. They do them in the wrong order. And that if you do them in the right order, it makes an enormous difference. Now, if you are moving from dating to relating, this part of the course will be perfect timing for you. And if you're already relating, or even if you're mating, this is a chance to step back and reevaluate and learn new skills that will help you be successful regardless of the stage of your relationship, assuming you're with the right partner, right? That's the key. Now, once you shift from the casual stage of dating and you move on to relating, everything changes, except for one thing. It should still be easy, and it should be a lot of fun. Relatively easy and a lot of fun. Now, we want you to focus in the relating stage on creating clear boundaries and agreements about what it means to be a couple. That's what this stage is all about. And typically, it takes a year or 2 to sort all of this out. If you practice what's in this course, this will go more quickly, and it will be easier than if you're trying to do this without the skills that we're teaching in this program. When you're in the relating stage, what's required is maturity and really good communication skills. And with sufficient maturity and communication skills, then you'll be able to determine if the 2 of you are compatible and if you can create a healthy partnership. So let's get started. We have a lot of territory to cover, and I will begin by giving you a preview of what is in this section of the course. So the first thing you're going to hear me talk about is the idea of relating. Relating is a verb. It's an activity. It's something you do. And people often use the word relationship. But what is that? A relationship is not a thing. It's not something static. Using a noun to describe something that is an active, alive process causes us to think correctly about what relating really is. So from now on, I want to encourage you to start thinking about what you're doing with your partner as relating. You either relate well or you don't. But instead of talking about my relationship, start talking about how you are relating. And if you don't relate well, you can learn to relate well. It's a skill. It's a skill that you can learn. Now, as you look forward and you start thinking about the changes when you go from dating to relating, there are a few things that I want to bring to your attention. And the first one has to do with an idea of unconditional love. A lot of people seem to move into the relating stage seeking and hoping to find unconditional love. And we're going to suggest to you that that's a mistake. When you go from dating to relating, the main thing that changes is you start to have more rights and more responsibilities. And there are things that will be expected of you by your partner, and there are things that you will expect from your partner. These are conditions. And I hear so many people who come to my counseling office talking about unconditional love. And they seem to think that it's the Holy Grail. But every successful romantic partnership that we see is conditional. And I mean every couple we know who pursues unconditional love as their ideal, they seem to be in a state of confusion. They seem to never get what it is they want. And so I encourage you to really think about this. For romantic partnerships to work, we're going to suggest to you that they are conditional. Now, as soon as we start relating, conditions and agreements come into play. And so really get clear about what your agreements are. What do you need from your partner? What does your partner need from you? What are the basic agreements that you're making to one another? This is really key for you to be successful in a romantic partnership. In this course, we're also going to help you identify your top 5 values. And the process that we go through is, again, one that we encourage you to do with your partner if you have a partner. And if you don't have a partner, this is still really valuable because it will help you identify the right kind of person for you to look for. And so we're going to go through a process a little bit later in this section that will help you clarify your top values. There are going to be tools that I teach in this part of the course that will help you improve your relating. I'm going to be teaching a mindfulness practice, and the short name for it is EYES. And it's really about seeing through your partner's eyes. I'm also going to be teaching an exercise which we call Resource Your Feelings. And there's nowhere else that you will learn this incredibly powerful concept. It's really at the heart of how we're going to be teaching you to communicate and talk to yourself as well as your partner. And then the last exercise in this section is going to be about making agreements. And I talked a little bit about how important this is, and I really can't stress it enough. Making agreements will dramatically simplify the way that you relate with your partner. Okay, so let's get started by talking a little bit more about what we mean when we say relating. And first, I want to remind you that this is a verb. It's something you do. So try to stop talking about your relationship like it's a thing that's separate from you. The way you relate will define your relationship. Now, when you start relating with another person, you're creating something larger than yourself, and this is going to foster growth. And the growth needs to be both for you as an individual as well as for you as a couple. So start to think about the idea that you are creating something larger than yourself. Being a couple is different than going through the world as an individual. So just start to be curious about that. Once you start relating, you'll be operating based on certain agreements that you have with your partner. The problem is that most of us never make these agreements explicit. We all in partnership have agreements, but many of them are covert. We really never talked about them. And so I'm going to walk you through a process that will help you make your agreements completely clear and above board so that there's no confusion. Relating is also about learning to respect your differences and not be threatened by the fact that your partner is different and that your partner sees the world in a different way. And the question I want you to consider is, can you accept and appreciate your partner for who she or he is? And if you can't, then you're probably with the wrong person. Now, if you can, but it takes a lot of work on your part, you're really challenging yourself to accept your partner, then you might ask the question, what stops me from accepting my partner as he is or as she is right now? And the answer to that question may become clearer as you go through this section of the course. It's a very important and fundamental question. Now, one key to dealing with your differences is learning to maturely express yourselves. And the way I think about this is that anything can be said in two ways. Anything can be said maturely or immaturely. And in this section, as well as in the next one, which is about mating, I'm going to teach you some skills to help you communicate in a mature way. And if you do learn to communicate in a mature way, you are moving in the direction of making your romantic relationship a lot easier. Okay, the relating stage is the stage when we recommend you begin to get physical, to begin to have a sexual relationship. And we encourage you to be really deliberate about this, to share your ideas about healthy sexuality, and to do this without talking a whole lot about your past lovers. That's something that we see an awful lot of couples do, and it almost always seems like it's a mistake. Now, if you've already started your sexual relating, let's say you've been together for a while, either in the relating or the mating stage, we're going to encourage you to just take a little step back and have some conversations about what you need to have a healthy sexual relationship. And also talk about what changes would you like to make in your sexual relationship if you already have one. And then, of course, what does your partner want? What does your partner need to feel like he or she is enjoying a healthy sexual relationship with you? So regardless of what stage you're in, except if you're in the dating stage, because in the dating stage we're suggesting that you shouldn't be sexual, this is the time to start opening up these doors. Now, once you're into the relating as well as in the mating, you're going to begin a process known as individuating. And we all go through a process of individuating, and we individuate first from our parents. It's really about learning to stand on our own 2 feet. And unfortunately, in most Western cultures, we don't actually have any good rituals for this. And that's unfortunate because it's an incredibly critical and important stage in terms of our psychological and emotional development. Typically, we don't complete the process of individuating from our parents before we get involved in a romantic partnership. We're typically still working through some issues with our parents, and some of those get transferred over, and we work them through with our partner. And the idea when we individuate is that we want to become a partner, become a partnership, without losing ourselves. So we want to remain an individual while we learn how to be in relationship with another person. And the key is that we don't become overly dependent on one another. This is another way to say the same thing. We are learning to become a we without losing the me, right? So we want to stay two individuals because it's two healthy me's That's what it takes to create a healthy we. And romantic relating is when you become a we. You're no longer just a me. And to do this, which, by the way, we never learn about how to do this in school. We have very few role models when we're growing up. So learning to do this is part of our focus in this course. It's about learning how to become clearer about who you are, and then how to retain a sense of yourself while you merge with another person to create a we. Okay, let's look again at this model. This is the 3 stages of romantic relationships. And I want to emphasize that in the relating stage, we are still exploring chemistry and styles, but now we get to go deeper and we get to learn about our partner's values and our partner's dreams. And in this part of the course, you'll explore your values in an attempt to determine if your values are compatible with your partner's values. You'll also explore your dreams because you want to see if you and your partner share a dream or share a vision for how you want your lives to unfold over time. It's a really important piece. And it's unrealistic to do that in the dating stage. And so this is the perfect time to look ahead. And again, whether you're relating right now or whether you're mating, we still encourage you to take a fresh look at where you want to go in your lives as a couple. Okay, here it is, the 36, one more time. Now, when we were in the dating stage, I was saying if you don't get a 36, you probably should discontinue dating this particular person and move on. Now that we're in the relating stage, I'd give a little bit more leeway. I would say if your score is in the 30s, you want to see if you can develop it. You want to see if you can build it up to a 36. It certainly would be inappropriate to just walk away because you have a 33 or a 34. But it is important to build it up because that's what's going to allow your partnership to be easy. As we look at values, and values are deeper than styles, the question is going to be, what are your top 5 values? Now, one way to think about this is to notice what it is that you work hard to obtain or to maintain in your life. This will give you insights into what it is that you really value. And another important thing to notice is what values do you have that are non-negotiable? These should be shared right away with your partner so that you don't waste time. For example, there's a question about children versus no children. And if you're insistent upon having children, you should let your partner know that. Or if you absolutely don't want children, you should let your partner know that. There's a question around things like being fiercely independent versus wanting to find a partnership where you have constant companionship. And if this is really important to you, make sure that you let the other person know and make sure you're compatible in these areas. Monogamy is a really obvious one. If this is important to you and you're not experiencing compatibility because your partner wants to have an open relationship, then you're probably wasting time. What's your commitment to being mature? Is this really important to you? Is it equally important to your partner? I'm not saying that you need to have this commitment to create a romantic partnership, but I am saying that if you have a commitment to maturity and your partner doesn't, it's going to be really difficult. Integrity and honesty, the same thing. There's no prerequisite that says you have to have high integrity or be honest, but if these are important to you, find out if they're also important to your partner. And then personal growth. The fact that you're doing this course would suggest that personal growth is very important to you because you're spending time and money and energy on this. The question is this equally important to your partner? So these should be discussed early on because you don't want to waste time with another person if you can't accept one another's deeply held values. So what are your values that are non-negotiable? and make sure that you share those as early as you can. Now we're going to move more deeply into this exercise, and you will find a worksheet to help you guide you through this process. It's in your companion workbook. The way this works is I'm going to ask you to list your top values across the top of a page so they look something like what you're looking at right now, where you see the 5 values. This person says, my home, my parents, my career, my church, and my health are my top values. Okay? Now, for each of your top values, I'm going to ask you to make a sub-list using 4 additional words that represent the same values. And you're going to do this for each one of them. And when you're done, you're going to end up with a list of 25 words. And it's going to look something like this. As you complete this, you will be adding words that represent the original values, but they're different words. They're just a different take on the original 5 values. And now, once you have these 25 words, and this will take a little time, by the way. I mean, this will take, this should take a half an hour or an hour before you're complete. Now I want you to go through and circle the word that best captures your top value in each column. And it may or may not be the word you started with. So let's look at the first column. And let's say that I look at those 5 words and I come back to the first one, which was home, and I say that actually is my top value. I go on to the second column, the one that begins with parents, and I say actually the value that stands out, the one that's most important to me, is love. When I look at career, I say no, it is. Career is the right word. When I look at the value that began with church, I end up realizing that the real word for me is safety. And when I look at the value health, health is actually the right word. Now, I want you to notice that this person that we're looking at, this hypothetical or prototypical person, who had the value of home and then listed other words, and those included retirement, stability, safety, and pride. I want you to notice that later in this exercise, you'll see that the value of safety comes up again in the column with the heading church. So realize that one value may show up in multiple columns, and that's absolutely fine. It's not a problem at all. Now, I also want you to notice that love is a top value in the second column. And it didn't show up at first. At first, this person started by saying parents, but then upon further reflection, love ended up being the more meaningful word or the more meaningful value. Now, when you see values that are vague, like love, you want to be mindful, because what does love mean? Does it mean that this person wants to care for his or her parents as they're aging? I mean, love cropped up under parents, so that might be a natural way to think about this. But love has many forms that it can take, so find out exactly what it means to you and to your partner. The same thing with health. It has many meanings: physical health, emotional health, spiritual health. Now, the more specific you can be in this exercise, the better. And that is part of the reason that I've asked you to select from a list of 5 words going down vertically. I'm trying to get you to find precisely the right word. And the reason is that you'll end up with a list after you go through this. You'll end up with a list of your top 5 values. And it looks like this. For this particular person, these are his or her top 5 values. And what we do then is we continue and look at your values and compare them with your partner's values. So there are yours, and then we fill in the top values for your partner. And this is an exercise that I want you to do together. You'll find a page in your workbook to complete this. And going through this process usually results in people actually changing their values, because most of us haven't really thought deliberately about our values. And to a large degree, we just adopt the values that we grow up with, and we never really question them. Now, some of us are still living with the values that we learned from our parents, and some of us are rebelling against the values we learned from our parents. But in neither case have we really thoughtfully and intentionally chosen our values. And this is really valuable to do because this is how we shape our lives, by knowing what's most important to us. Now, there's a key question to ask yourself after you've identified your top 5 values. And here's the question. Do I live according to my values? Do I live according to my values? Now, if the answer is no, then you're not living a congruent life. What I mean is that you're not living in accordance with what you say is important to you. So you say one thing, but your actions say something else. And this is pretty common. And it's very relevant when you're looking at romantic partnerships, because you're sending a mixed message to your partner. You say you value certain things, but you don't live that way. Now, how does that make you look to your partner? And when you say to your partner that you're committed to them, should they believe that you'll live according to that statement? And what changes do you need to make so that you are living a congruent life, so that you are living in accordance with your values? I encourage you to spend some time with all of this. It's really helpful to know what your values are and then figure out what's keeping you from living according to your values. I've taught this exercise all over the world with many, many groups. And it's rare that people discover their values and answer this question by saying, yes, this is how I'm living my life. And the few people who have answered the question in that way, they stand out. They are distinctly more comfortable, happier, and I would say emotionally healthier people. So really valuable to spend some time looking at this. We're going to move on now. We're going to talk a little bit about dreams. And during the relating stage, it is worth exploring your dreams because you want to make sure that you have compatible visions of where you're going in the future. So the idea is to see if your dreams line up with your partner's. They don't need to be the same, but are you both headed north? Are you both headed in the same basic direction? And here are a few questions that you might consider. What is your focus for each of the decades ahead? And depending on how old you are, there may be different amounts of decades that you're thinking about. But what is your focus in each of the decades that lies ahead? And what do you want to accomplish before you die? What's most important to you? Where do you want to live? That's an incredibly basic but important question. And who are your role models of marriage? Do you have any role models? And if you do, talk a little bit about them. How do you want to die? Where and who do you want to have around you when you are dying? And what 3 words will best describe you at age 75? And if you're already 75 or older, then pick some amount of time that is out maybe 5 years from now. And what 3 words do you hope will best describe your partner when she or he is 75, or again, older if you're already 75? Now, there's a page in your workbook, and I'm going to encourage you to do the following thing that will help you develop this process around your dreams. What I want you to do is write a page maybe 2 pages, no more than that, about your dreams, and then compare them. But don't just talk them through. I want you to write the dreams out first, and then I want you to sit down and share and see what you learn about one another. This process will help inform you about decisions with regard to whether or not you should move forward as a couple, if that's a question. It may not be a question. You may already be mating, you may know what your dreams are, and this may not be significant. But if you're early in the relating stage, this is really valuable to spend some time and say, are we headed in the same direction? I also want to just share with you that I remember a time in my life when Hannah talked about retiring and gardening, that was her dream. And at the time, I was really ambitious. I was wanting to develop programs, and I was wanting to teach and do all sorts of things. And at that time, we had these wonderful mentors in our lives, and they were much older than we were. They were about 85 at the time, and they strongly encouraged Hannah to rethink her dreams. They cautioned us. They said, if she and I wanted to stay together, that she would need to reconsider and alter her dreams. And of course, there's nothing wrong with retiring and gardening. It's just that they knew that those dreams were not compatible with my dreams. Now, interestingly, they didn't ask me to reconsider my dreams at the time, but of course that might have been appropriate. So take the time, get clear about your dreams, and see if you're compatible, and have a good time doing this. It's kind of fun, or it can be fun, to think about where you want to be in 20 years or 30 years, depends on your age right now. Okay, I want to move on and share with you some of the frequently asked questions that we get when we teach our workshops. The first question we hear is, what if I want to grow and my partner doesn't? Now, to me, this is a reflection of values, because one person has personal growth as a value and maybe your partner doesn't. What we say is both people need to share this desire to grow, or else you have a fundamental mismatch. People ask us, they say, if my partner pushes my buttons, doesn't that help me grow? And we always tell people that having your buttons pushed is not the best catalyst for growth. It tends to result in what I call reactive growth instead of proactive growth. And the growth will be slower because you're more likely to get defensive when someone is pushing your buttons. People are going to grow the most when they feel safe. And if you feel like your buttons are being pushed, you probably don't feel completely safe. People say to us, isn't relating supposed to be difficult and challenging? And our answer is very simple, no. This does not have to be difficult, but if you think it does, then it will be. Now, we have proven for ourselves that relating can be relatively easy. And you might say, well, what does that mean? It means that regardless of our issues, in my relationship with Hannah, we communicate respectfully. It means that we treat each other like we're friends. It means that we solve our problems together. And yes, sometimes one of us has more work to do than the other, but we support each other in doing our individual work. Now, why is relating often so hard, right? Mostly it's because people give themselves permission to behave immaturely. But we don't think it's necessary. We don't think it's appropriate. We're both, as of this recording, I'm in my late 50s and Hannah is in her 60s. And we just don't see that we need to give ourselves permission to behave poorly. As I said earlier, any emotion or thought can be expressed in one of two ways, immaturely or maturely. And if you learn to express yourselves maturely, then relating becomes much easier. Question we often hear is, how should I relate to my ex-partners? And our short answer is, you should not. Now, of course, sometimes you have to. Sometimes you may share a child or certain issues that you have to deal with an ex-partner. But what we're really saying is, if you have to deal with an ex, make sure that you include your new partner. Make sure that they're included in whatever's going on. And we think you should only relate privately with ex-partners if your new partner is totally comfortable with that. And even then, in the relating stage, we discourage you from being any more involved with ex-partners than you have to be. Put your focus into your new partner. Don't distract or confuse yourself. We hear the question, do both people need to be very mature, or do they just need to share the same level of maturity? Now, similar levels of maturity are really helpful, and the more mature you are, the better. But the reality is we all need to start from where we are. And if we have the right modeling, if we have the right examples in our lives, and we learn certain tools, then we can mature ourselves very quickly. This does not have to take a long time. It's something we refine over a lifetime, but we can take great leaps in terms of our level of maturity. Next question, when is it the right time to get physical? And the way I think about this is that I want to make the other person earn the special privilege of gaining access to my body, right? And I coach people this way in my counseling sessions. I'll basically say, treat your body as something special. And if you're going to share your body, make sure that your partner earns that right. So I discourage you from being overly casual about becoming sexual. I think the most important thing is to be intentional. Talk about how you want to intentionally create your sexual partnership. And I discourage you from talking about previous lovers. I think that's just about always a mistake. Next question, how do I know if it's time to start mating? So one key to deciding this is that the decision, in my opinion, should be easy, should be surrounded by enthusiasm, not anxiety. If you're really anxious about going from relating to mating, then you're probably not ready. If you've been relating for more than a couple of years and you can't decide that it's time to move on to the mating stage, then I would suggest you get some help, because I don't think you want to stay in the relating stage much longer than a couple of years. If you do, you can end up in some kind of a rut of indecision. Now, you can hear in all of my responses that we, in other words, myself and Hannah, we're pretty conservative around a lot of this stuff. And we think this works really well in romantic partnerships, in part because all of us are somewhat insecure. And so if we have a conservative approach, kind of conservative values around our romantic relating, it seems to help most people relax. Now, of course, this isn't true for everyone, but if I were to paint with a broad brush, I would say that approaching romantic relating and sexual boundaries, approaching these things in a conservative way, seems to be helpful to most people. Okay, we're going to go on. I'm going to introduce you to a mindfulness practice. This is the mindfulness practice that was designed specifically for the relating stage. And it's called Seeing Through Your Partner's Eyes. Now, one of you is going to be the leader, and the other one is going to be blindfolded in this process. And what you'll do is that the leader will find something that is fascinating or beautiful to focus on. And it can be indoors or outdoors. And you're going to lead your blindfolded partner so that they're standing in front of this object. Now, you want to position your partner so that when they raise their blindfold, they'll be looking directly at the object. They'll be looking exactly at whatever it is that you wanted them to see. And you don't say anything. This is a nonverbal process. You don't say anything. And I want you to do this 4 or 5 times. In other words, you're going to lead your partner from one thing of beauty to another thing of beauty. And it's probably best if you go out ahead of time and you kind of scope out the territory so you know where you're leading your partner. And when you're done, you're going to switch roles. You're going to take a break, maybe a 5-minute break, and then the person who was the leader will become blindfolded, and the person who was blindfolded will lead you around. Now, the process is not supposed to be highly analytical. I don't want you to spend a lot of time thinking about this. The idea is just to allow yourself to go through this process and notice how you feel. Allow yourself to notice both the similarities and the differences in terms of how you and your partner view things in the world. And the process is nonverbal, but I still want you to connect nonverbally. In other words, notice your partner's expression when they raise their blindfold. And you're going to be holding them by their hand when you're walking them from one object to another. So there's some connection that you'll have, or you can hold them by their arm. The idea is to do this slowly. Don't rush. Take your time and sort of savor the experience. It's a sensory experience, nonverbal. It's a different way of connecting and relating. Okay, I am going to move on and talk a little bit about some relating do's and relating don'ts. So the relating don'ts, first of all, don't share excessively about your past relationships. I think that it is almost always a mistake to do this. Don't explain all the ways in which you were a mess in the past. Allow your partner to see you as healthy, not someone that they need to fix. Don't be fickle, thinking about other potential partners while you're with this partner. Give yourself fully to your current partner, and then if this person's not right, you move on. But give yourself 100% to the partner that you're with now. Don't withhold your fears, but do present your fears in a mature way. We really don't want to ever encourage people to repress or suppress their feelings, but we make this very strong distinction between expressing yourself maturely and immaturely. And don't waste time arguing about who said what when, which is an incredibly common thing. Stop wasting time trying to prove the other person is wrong. It's unproductive, it's insulting. I learned a long time ago that Hannah is incredibly honest. So why should I not believe her when she tells me what is true for her? Now, I might see the world in a different way, but that's no reason to discount or question the way she sees things. And if I don't believe her, or if you don't believe your partner, then why are you with that person? I think it's a really important question to ask. Okay, we're going to take a look at the relating do's, and the first one is do be honest. Because honesty creates your foundation, and without honesty, you're creating a trap, and it's a trap that you're going to eventually fall in. So this is just fundamental. The second thing is, if you say something that you don't feel good about, and this is inevitable, it will happen, go back and redo yourself as soon as possible. And this idea comes from Respeak, and Respeak is the language of rheology. You're going to learn more about it as we continue. This is an amazing gift that we have if we choose to take advantage of it. And the way it works is very simple. All I need to do, if I don't feel good about the way I said something or the way I treated you, is come back as soon as possible and say, I don't like how I just said myself, and I want to re-say myself. This is incredibly freeing and liberating, and I really encourage you to try this. I mentioned this earlier, but it's so important I'm going to mention it again. You can learn to ask for what you want instead of complaining about what you didn't get. And this will change the nature of your relationship. The next one is to take responsibility for your own feelings and thoughts instead of holding your partner responsible for how you feel. Now, things happen in life, and we all respond in our own unique ways. And if your partner does something and you feel upset, what I'm suggesting is that you don't blame your partner. Instead, you take responsibility for how you feel and you just talk about what's going on for you. Now, this is a huge step forward in terms of maturity, and I'm going to talk more about it in a few minutes, because the next exercise that we're going to do is called resourcing your feelings. And that's what this is about. Before we go to resourcing your feelings, I just want to mention that during times of tension, the most important thing you can do is to listen and learn, and then notice if that's reciprocated. So when things are tough, or if one of you is upset or one of you is tired, the best thing that you can do for your partner is to listen to them and try to understand them. And then notice if they reciprocate. They may not reciprocate in the next minute, but in the big picture, do they do this for you? Because this is terribly important and very healing. Okay, people often ask what's at the heart of this work, and this is probably as close as we're going to get. This is about resourcing your feelings. So where do your feelings come from? Well, people often portray themselves as if they're passive or they're a victim in the way that they talk, in the way that they use language. And so they often act as if someone else is responsible for their feelings. I'll give you a few examples. So these are very common expressions. People say things like, "You make me feel so angry," or "My father makes me feel helpless," or "My past troubles me." These are very common expressions. And now I want to introduce you to alternative ways of saying the same thing. And actually, what you're saying isn't the same thing, it's very different. So instead of saying, "You make me feel so angry," I'm going to say, "I anger myself," or "I make myself angry." Instead of saying, "My father makes me feel helpless," like he's the perpetrator and I'm the victim, I'm going to say, "I make myself feel helpless when I'm with my father. I'm doing this to myself." Instead of saying, "My past troubles me," I'm going to say, "I trouble myself with my past." Now, all of this is, again, this is at the heart of Respeak. It is a dramatically different way of taking responsibility and owning ourselves. And the Respeak that we teach was actually originally developed by our mentors over 50 years ago. So this is not new. Their names are John and Joyce Weir. They were an absolutely remarkable couple and an example of what it looks like to live a healthy life. Healthy in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And when we met them, they were 85 years old. And then Hannah and I studied with them for 6 years. And eventually we became stewards of their work, where we started taking it out in the world and doing our own workshops under the guidance of John and Joyce. And they passed away at the age of 92, and we have continued to carry this work forward. And Respeak has been taught to thousands of people, and we would say that it is the single most helpful thing we've learned or taught in the past 20 years. Now, you're going to find a worksheet in your workbook where you can practice translating certain sentences from what I'll call regular speak into Respeak. And what happens when you use Respeak is you make absolutely clear that you are the active person creating your experience. And what I would say is, I am doing to myself, as opposed to the idea that I am having things done to me. I am angering myself. You are not making me angry. And this is just a radically different way of seeing the world. In the moment that I shift my language from "you make me angry" to So I make myself angry. I transform my experience. I acknowledge that I am doing something to myself, and there's no longer a perpetrator or a victim. Now, I'm not saying that there's never a perpetrator or a victim. There are things that happen in life. But in our normal day-to-day interactions, when we interact as a couple, there's no perpetrator and no victim. But we often act as if that's the case. We often act as if there is a perpetrator and one person is doing something to the other. And the language we use promotes that idea, where re-speak completely undermines that idea, and it gives us a new way, a new level playing field in which we can interact with one another. Now, I open a whole new world of possibilities when I change my language in this way. I empower myself because I no longer believe that I'm a victim of outward circumstances. I'm no longer a victim of my partner's behavior. So this is really a dramatically different way of using language. And to get started, I'm going to suggest that you just think about this very simple way of beginning sentences, which is, I blank myself. I frustrate myself. I bore myself. I disappoint myself. I curious myself. I depress myself. And sometimes if that language structure feels awkward, then you can use the alternative where you say, I make myself. Like, to say, I happy myself may sound awkward, so you may want to say, I make myself happy, or I make myself unhappy, or I make myself sad. So you can just play around with these two. I blank myself, or I make myself blank. And this is something that if you're going through the course with your partner, I really encourage the two of you to practice this, to start having this be the way that you speak to one another. And if you do, you're going to notice a profound difference. Okay, we're going to move on and talk about this next exercise. This is called making agreements. And this may be one of the most important things you can do in the relating stage. Done properly, this will dramatically minimize conflict in your relationship. And if you are unable to complete this process alone, then you should get some help. It's really important that you go through this. There is a worksheet in your workbook to help you with this process, so please use that. And I want to promote this in the following way, that when I talk about making agreements, I'm talking about big agreements having to do with big topics. Now, I'm going to introduce you to 5 major topics, but these are not the only big topics, and some of these may not be the right ones for you. You have to figure out what are the major areas where we need to have agreements so that we don't have to figure ourselves out on a day-to-day basis as we go along. So the first area that I'm going to suggest is a big topic would be your family of origin. Now, how are you going to deal with your family of origins? If you're a couple, how are you going to deal with the families that you came from? For example, do you have a commitment to care for your parents as they age? Or what about caring for children, if you have any? And what's your expectation of your partner? What role do they play? Or if you have grandchildren. And they're not family, but you might want to also think about ex-partners. How do they fit in? And how do you manage those relationships, particularly if you're still co-parenting with an ex-partner? Now, we know, for example, a couple, and the woman is unwilling to separate from her mother, but relating with her mother is causing all sorts of strain on her relationship with her husband, and they have no agreement around how to manage this. We know another couple, and the man wants to help raise his granddaughter, but his partner wants to limit the amount of time that the granddaughter spends at their house, which, by the way, is her house. And that's relevant. Now, around all of these issues, there's no right or wrong. That's not the point. It's a matter of reaching a high-level agreement. I call them meta-agreements, meta-agreements. And when you reach these high-level meta-agreements, then you don't have to quibble about these things on an ongoing basis. You just know what the rules are. You know what the agreements are. Really worth doing. Money is another one of the big ones for most people. So get clear about this. Are you sharing expenses? Is it 50-50? Is one of you supporting the other? Do you have agreements about spending and saving and investing? I remember Hannah and I had an issue when we were in the relating stage because I was living in her house. And if she were to die, she wanted the house to go to her daughters, but that would have left me without a home. So we came up with what I think is a really creative solution. I ended up buying life insurance on Hannah, which I paid for, so that if she were to die, her daughters would get the money and I would get the house. And everyone ended up feeling really good about the agreement. It was very creative and it took care of all the different needs. But before we came up with the agreement, it was a source of great tension. Okay, lifestyles. Lifestyle agreements have to do with things like your social life, agreements about how you care for yourselves, exercise, diet, partying, whatever the social context of your lives. Do you have agreements, particularly about the ways in which you will manage your differences? That's always the challenge. The next one is probably the big one. It's sexual boundaries. And this has to do with not only your own sex life, and there it's about what are your expectations, what are your personal boundaries, what are your limits, but this also has to do with big agreements you have, like are we going to be monogamous? Is it okay to flirt? Are we going to be very strict, or are we going to be very liberal in these areas having to do with our sexual boundaries? And I've kind of mentioned this before, but Hannah and I believe the more conservative that we are with regard to our sexual boundaries, the less likely we are to stimulate fear and anxiety in our partner. And so that's been our approach. Okay, the next area has to do with what I call behavioral boundaries. And what I mean by this is, how do you agree to treat each other, especially during times of tension? Do you agree to always be kind and respectful? Or do you agree that it's perfectly okay once in a while to flip your lid and raise your voice and scream and yell because you're upset? Now, these agreements are really significant because most people never make these agreements, and then every time you have tension or conflict, you end up fighting over these things because there are no ground rules. There's no basic agreement about how you're going to cope. And it's really largely about how do you cope when you're overwhelmed, or when you're tired, or when one of you is feeling really raw. Now, in my relationship with Hannah, we agree that our highest priority is how we treat one another. It's all about how we conduct ourselves. And so we have an agreement to always try and understand the other person's point of view, to always treat each other like friends, like we're friends, to not doubt what the other person is saying. These are our agreements, and they work incredibly well for us. Now, you also want to look at any areas you have where there's tension in your relating. Anything that you fight about on a regular basis is probably an area where you need to make some agreements. And so look for those areas. As far as the agreements, the actual details of the agreements, they should be short. The agreement should be short. They should be simple. And they should be unambiguous. And you should know what the consequences will be if you don't honor the agreements. And I see basically three kinds of consequences, but there may be more than that. The first one is what I call tit for tat, and this basically means that I can do to you whatever you do to me. And I don't think these agreements work well at all. Hannah and I have never used them, but a lot of people do. And they'll say, well, you did this, and so I can do that. I think these tend to be pretty immature agreements, and they don't recognize that people are different. And so what works for one person very well may not work for the other person. The second consequence that I see is seeking help. If you have an agreement and you don't honor it, you probably need to get help. And the third consequence is breaking up. When it comes to your big agreements, breaking up is an option. Now, this is the agreement that Hannah and I have. For example, if one of us were to be unfaithful to the other, we both believe that would mean the end of our marriage. And as a result of our clarity about this and the severity of the consequence, we're both really careful. We're really careful. I encourage you not to have your agreements be squishy, because then you don't really know where you stand. So the clearer you can get, the better off you'll be. My final point has to do with remembering that you need to be flexible during times of emergency. For example, if our daughter gets sick and she needs us to care for our grandson, even if that's outside of our standard agreement, we would absolutely make an exception, and we would do that. We would take care of him. So I can't stress enough how important it is to make these agreements so that you stop trying to figure things out on the fly. And once these agreements are in place, then you free yourself to love each other. And stop arguing about whether one of you is being too flirtatious or spending too much money. You don't have to deal with those little questions on a daily basis, because you both agreed, and hopefully you both honor your agreements. Okay, we've come to the end of the relating section, and I just want to summarize a few points. The first one is that when you're relating, I don't encourage you to jump into the mating. Give yourselves time to relate. Give yourselves time to make agreements. See if you can honor them. Get to know each other at a deeper level before you make lifelong commitments. And we think this generally takes a year to 2. I mentioned this before. I'm going to keep mentioning it. Instead of criticizing what you're not getting, ask for what you want. This just dramatically simplifies your relating. Remember that you will get what you settle for. So if you start out working really, really hard to make the relating good, you're very likely to end up working really hard. Now, I'm not saying that hard work is never required. I'm not saying that. There certainly have been therapy sessions that Hannah and I have gone to, and they felt really difficult at the time. But what I'm saying is that on a day in and day out basis, it's been very easy for us to be together. And then when we bump into a tough spot, we deal with it immediately, we do whatever we need to do, and we get back to enjoying ourselves. Treat your partner in such a way that you respect yourself. This is just vital. If you do this, you're not likely to be defensive and reactive because you actually feel good about your own personal conduct. Very, very important. Be yourself, but be open to the idea that your way isn't the right way. It's just your way. So be open and realize that you both have valuable and different perspectives. Practice re-speak. Remember to resource your feelings. And there is a practice exercise in the workbook on this. I encourage you to go over it time and time again. Just keep using re-speak more and more, and you'll find that the conflict and tension in your relationship goes down by the day. And take the time to create clear agreements about any areas in your life that are important to you. The clearer the agreements, the less there will be to argue about. And that's the idea, is get those things so that they don't have to be dealt with on a moment-to-moment or day-to-day basis. You just deal with them during these large, important conversations you have. Okay, I want to just take a sneak peek ahead. My voice is a little tired. But When we go to the mating section, which is the next one, you will have a chance to learn some additional skills. One of these is noticing how mating is different than relating. You'll also learn more ways to appreciate your differences. You'll learn how to reconnect during hard times. This is a great piece that I really look forward to sharing with you. When things are tough, this is a shortcut back to one another. You'll discover how to grow your love over a long period of time, which I think is essential because in the mating stage, we talk about the importance of captivating one another. So how do you do that? You're going to learn to differentiate yourselves as individuals while you are together as a couple. So in the relating stage, the important thing was individuating. And in the mating stage, the important thing is something called differentiating. And I'll explain what that is. I'm going to share with you a very powerful and wonderful 4-minute mindfulness practice that you can do at any time. I'm going to suggest you do it with your partner. It's really great. Hannah and I do it almost every day. You're going to learn a new communication tool that is a fantastic way to resolve conflict if it does arise. And you're going to learn how to score that magic 36. That's the number we keep talking about. Okay, I hope that this has been an eye-opener. I hope you're walking away from this section saying, wow, these are some new things I've never heard before. These are things to practice. And that's the key. That really is the key. Just practice what it is that I'm sharing with you. You don't have to commit to do these things for a lifetime, but if you practice for a month and you don't notice significant improvement, I'll be really surprised. And if you practice for a month and you do notice significant improvement, then hopefully you'll just keep going and keep doing this. Okay, thank you, and I will be talking to you in the next section, which is about mating. Okay, so you finished the section or the part of the course that was about relating, and this reminds me of a joke about a guy. He's in New York City, he's walking around, he's got a cello on his back, and he sees a taxi cab, and he goes up to the taxi cab, and he says to the driver, he says, "How do you get to Carnegie Hall?" And the driver looks at him, and he sees the cello, and he says, "Practice, practice, practice." So that's true here, right? We're sharing all sorts of what we think are incredibly useful ideas and skills and practices. But the key is that you have to put them into effect. You have to practice them. You have to use these things. And so we really encourage you to do that. And I wouldn't rush into the next segment, which is mating. I would take some time, work with the skills that we presented in the relating stage, and then when you feel like you have a handle on those, then move forward and go into the mating segment. If you are already mating, the skills that we talked about in the relating segment, they're completely relevant and necessary. They lay a foundation, and it's on that foundation that you go ahead and you build a long-term marriage or long-term commitment